Hi guys, welcome back to Classic Spin. Today I have some more of The Council of Nicaea by A.E. Byrne. Today's a little bit more talking about political maneuvering of the different bishops, some of their intentions, as well as the Emperor Constantine and his intentions. I think in this episode, the council really begins in earnest. Constantine enters, which is a really cool scene, but anyway, that's pretty much it. I hope you enjoy the video. Chapter 2. Nicaea, City of Victory, was the second city in Bithynia. The name pleased Constantine, self-styled victorious, when he decided to summon the council from which he hoped so much to meet there, rather than at Nicaea. It was more accessible and a most attractive place. The beautiful town lay on an eminence in the midst of a well-wooded, flower-embellished country, with the clear, bright waters of the Ascanian lake at its foot. The bright green of the chestnut woods in early summer stood out in the foreground. In the distance, snow-capped Olympus towered over its mountain ranges. The number of bishops who attended the council is uncertain. Constantine's own letter to the Alexandrians speaks of more than 300 bishops. Having entertained them, he should have known. But it is curious that the lists of names printed by Turner vary from 195 to 223. Probably, except in the case of Rome, bishops represented by delegates were not included. Eustathius of Antioch, according to Theodoret, says about 270, but that he had not taken any pains to ascertain the exact number. Eusebius of Caesarea speaks of more than 250. Athanasius, after AD 350, said 300, and later on 318, the number which was generally accepted. Hilary speaks of 300 or more, and again of 318, and so does Epiphanius. This number would be about 1/6 of the whole body of bishops. We are not impressed today by the mystical meaning attached to the number 318, as being the number of Abraham's victorious servants. In Greek numerals it was written TIH, T for the cross, IH for the sacred name Jesus. After all, in view of the vicissitudes through which the real leaders of the council passed to the triumph of their cause, it is not surprising that mystical and legendary stories and interpretations grew up. For the consistency of the defenders of its faith, under unexampled trials, proves that they relied on something more than a majority vote, and we hold that its subsequent worldwide acceptance confirms their claim to have contended earnestly for the faith of the gospel, for the truth as it is in Jesus. The bishops traveled at public expense in carriages or on horses, asses, and mules, with attendant priests, deacons, and servants, so that the number of the emperor's guests was large. The excitement at the preliminary meetings was intense. In these, eminent philosophers and logicians seem to have taken part. It has been well said that Aristotle made men Arians, but the fortune of the debate was not to turn upon dialectical ability. Indeed, the greater number of the bishops were quite unversed in metaphysical subtleties, and only desired some formula which should exclude them. The personnel of the council was preponderatingly Eastern, but this did not impair its representative character. The great Eastern sees were all represented. Alexander of Alexandria brought its suffragans. Eustathius of Antioch, Eusebius of Caesarea, Paulinus of Tyre, Macarius of Aelia, Jerusalem, represented Palestine. Eusebius of Nicomedia, Maris of Chalcedon, Theonis of Nicaea itself gave solid support for Arius in Bithynia. Marcellus of Ancyra was prominent in opposition to them. From Cappadocia came Aristaces, as proxy for his famous father, Gregory the Illuminator. We note the name of Theophilus, bishop of the Goths. The emperor, out of respect for his character, had specially invited the Novatianist Acetius. Socrates gives an amusing account of a conversation between them after the council. Constantine asked him whether he agreed with the creed and the settlement of the Paschal question. "There is nothing new, your majesty," he replied, "in the decisions of the council. For it is thus that from the beginning, and from the apostolical times, I have received both the definition of the faith and the time of the Paschal feast." When asked why he still remained separate from the communion of the church, he plunged into a long story of Novatianist grievances. But Constantine had the last word. "Plant a ladder, Acetius, and climb up into heaven by yourself." The Western Empire was but thinly represented. The Bishop of Rome, too old to come himself, had sent 2 priests, Vito and Vincent. From Calabria came Marcus, from Gaul, Nicasius of Die, from Pannonia, Domnus. Most important of all was Hosius of Cordova, the emperor's confidant. Eusebius of Nicomedia was a suspect, through his connection with Licinius, and as protagonist on the Arian side. Eusebius of Caesarea had not yet made the profound impression which gave him influence in later years. According to the new evidence, he also was suspect. St. Chrysostom calls the synod a council of confessors. Indeed, many of them bore the outward marks of persecution, such as Paul of Neo-Caesarea, whose hands had been paralyzed with hot irons. 2 Egyptian bishops had each lost an eye. One of them, Paphnutius, who had also been hamstrung, was singled out by the emperor, who who kissed his mutilated face. Hosius also had suffered under Maximin, Eustathius also. It was this quality of so many of its members which gave its supreme influence to that first ecumenical council on the life and thought of the Church. It was not mere numbers, nor the emperor's favor, but the subsequent general consent of the faithful to its decisions, which gave them validity. In the cold light of criticism, it is possible to paint many of them in unpleasing colors. They were passionate and vindictive, ready to rail at one another, and to acquiesce in the punishment of their opponents by the state. Truth demands that we should say this at the outset, and acknowledge further that they were not, all of them, intellectual enough to appreciate all the arguments used in the debate. It has often been pointed out that the final form of the creed, submitted as a test of orthodoxy for bishops, was carried through by the efforts of a clear-sighted minority. Yet, when we have said all this, the fact remains that the very lack of education, which debarred many of them from following subtle arguments, made their practical unanimity on the main question all the more impressive. Like the first apostles chosen by the Lord to be witnesses, they had the primary qualification of witnesses, ability to tell a plain, unvarnished story of their experience of the Christ who lived as man among men, and pointed them to the way of salvation from sin. They had indeed taken up the cross to follow him who paid in his cross the price of their salvation. They had found in the mystery of his resurrection the revelation of a new life, the power to conquer sin, and in their conviction of his lordship, they found power to suffer for him. Their religious experience was the ground of their loyalty to the belief, handed down to them by their fathers, that he was divine, on the strength of which they worshipped him. This was the ultimate test in the long controversy which followed. If Christ is not really the Son of God, it is idolatry to worship him, the crucial phrase of their creed which confesses him to be in the mystery of his person, uncreated, of the essence of God the Father, stated a claim to which their consciences bore witness. The date of the opening has been disputed, but Socrates is probably right in stating May 20th, for we know from the dating of a law in the collection known as the Theodosian Code, that the emperor was at Nicaea on the 23rd of that month. It is commonly said that the emperor did not arrive till July 3rd, when he had kept the anniversary of his victory at Adrianople. But there seems to be some reason for assigning June 19th as the date of the final decision against Arianism, and that would leave barely 30 days for the protracted debates, during some of which he was present. It would also leave another month for the discussion of the Meletian question, and the date for the keeping of Easter, in which Constantine took just as much interest as in the doctrinal question. The council met first in the church, but not with closed doors, for not only Christian laymen, but even pagan professors took part in the debate. When the emperor arrived from Nicaea, he received a great packet of accusations made by bishops against bishops. The next day, he met them in a large hall of the palace, with seats arranged along the sides of the hall. There was a low chair for the emperor, in front of which stood a table, on which lay an open copy of the Holy Gospels. We can imagine the thrill of emotion with which the assembly rose to welcome his entrance into the synod. They saw a tall, commanding figure, clad in the imperial robe, with a jeweled diadem, yet he advanced with a faltering step, while a blush spread over his cheek, and he remained standing until invited to sit. One of the bishops, Eusebius of Caesarea, calls him "Father of the right party," made a speech. Some have thought that this was Eusebius himself, but it was more probably Eustathius, who was said by Theodoret to have crowned the emperor's head with a garland of eulogy, and thanked him for the interest which he had taken in religious affairs. Eusebius followed with a more elaborate oration. The emperor made a short reply in Latin, which was at once translated into Greek. "It is the sum of my wishes to find myself in your midst, and I owe thanks to the Savior of the universe that this wish has been attained." Then, having spoken of unanimity, he continued, "I, your fellow servant, am deeply pained whenever the Church of God is in dissension, a worse evil than the evil of war." He entreated them to put aside all personal enmities, produced the packet of accusations, and burnt it in a brazier with some words on the Christian doctrine of forgiveness. The great debates then began in earnest, the emperor following, and sometimes taking part in them. According to Theodoret, Eustathius of Antioch presided. He had presided over the councils of Nicaea and Neo-Caesarea, but Hosius signs first in the list, and at the time stood first in the emperor's confidence. Harnack might be right in suggesting that the occupants of the great sees may have presided in turn. Dr. Raven has justly called attention to the importance of the share which Eustathius took in the debates, which made him obnoxious to the Arians, as a zealous opponent of their teaching, and also to the moderate or conservative majority, because he disapproved of the principles of Origenism. While Athanasius and his fellows attacked only the minor premise of the Arian syllogism, that Christ was capable of change, the school of Antioch remained faithful to the Syrian tradition and attacked the major premise that Christ was the Logos. In other words, Eustathius taught that Christ possessed a complete human soul. That is most important, for it was denied by the Arians, and according to Raven and others, was not believed by Athanasius at this period, though its strenuous assertion by Eustathius may have been partly responsible for the modification of Athanasius's views in the conciliar letter of AD 362. The records are fragmentary and imperfect, but we gather that Arius was again called before the council, as before the emperor's arrival, and expressed himself energetically. He made a bad impression on Constantine, who was sarcastic at his expense. Dr. Bright says that his outspoken frankness, to be remembered to his credit, was an embarrassment to Eusebius of Nicaea, who tried to minimize its effect and obtain Constantine's support. According to Eusebius of Caesarea, Constantine listened patiently to all and took time to weigh the arguments advanced. The situation began to be clear. To their dismay, the Arian leaders found that they could not depend on more than 17 supporters. They seemed to have underrated the novelty of their teaching and even to have expected a victory.